One of the biggest advocates for ethics reform over the past several years has been my next guest. Dick Dadey is the executive director of Citizens Union, and he is the head of a coalition of groups that are advocating for redistricting reform as well as ethics reform. There's a lot of reform going on, talk
Yes.
at the Capitol. Dick, it's great to see you.
Nice to see you, Liz, too.
Okay, so let's start with ethics reform. It is in the air at the Capitol that there may soon be a deal. I know that there's a lot of talk, and that's intensifying. Right now, not quite soup. So are you optimistic? I mean, obviously you're here in Albany, which is a sign in and of itself. Are you optimistic that this is the week to get something done?
I'm optimistic that we will see something in the very near future. Whether it's this week or next week remains to be seen, but I do believe that they are close to a deal. The intensity of the discussions and negotiations that are taking place seems to mean that the issue has finally been enjoined by all parties, and the details are now being worked out.
Yeah, some of the details are pretty fascinating. One thing that we are not hearing, and it seems to me to be off the table, that we've seen in past years that sort of might have muddied the waters a little bit, is campaign finance reform. If you leave that for another day, can you still call this a full ethics reform, a robust package? Because obviously those campaign dollars are a big deal.
Yes, I mean, last year the ethics reform bill had a small element of campaign finance reform and only really dealt with the enforcement, giving new powers to the State Board of Elections to enforce already existing law.
Right.
We do not know whether that's going to be in it or not. We've asked that it be included. But remember, when that was included in last year's bill, the Senate Democrats had control of that chamber. There's a different political equation over there now.
Sure. Well, and also remember, because of redistricting, which we'll get into in a second, there's a huge concern among the Senate Republicans that they'll have a difficult time holding on to the chamber in 2012 because, look, the reality is that the enrollment trend is against them. There are just more Democrats enrolled in New York than there were Republicans. We can't really fight with the numbers. It's sort of a losing battle. But before we move to that, on ethics reform, we're also hearing some stuff. The focus has been about disclosure of outside income. That's what has gotten a number of people, including, of course, former Senate Majority Leader Joe Bruno, in trouble. We're hearing about different sort of areas of disclosure. In other words, like you would have to disclose not exactly I made $50,000, but 20 to 40, 50 to 80, for example. Why is that more palatable than the exact amount?
Well, I think you don't want to invade the total privacy of the individual, but you want a better understanding of how much that individual may make. And so that's why Citizens Union has advocated for much tighter bands of disclosure so that the public has a better sense of how much they make. And also that information be fully disclosed and available to the public, which is not something that is available right now to the public. And so if an ethics package does include those two things, that is a significant reform over what we have right now.
Right, and there's also this question about client lists. For example, if you are a private consultant, another area that gets people in trouble, again, a Joe Bruno area, a huge problem, Tony Seminario, the late Tony Seminario assemblyman who had a problem with this too. If you are a consultant, or more specifically, if you're an attorney, you would have to disclose your direct clients. That seems to be a little bit tricky because of the definition of who it is that you might represent.
Right. I mean, and I think that is, still something that's subject to negotiations and discussion. But from our perspective, the public has a right to know exactly who you're representing and who your clients are and what's the nature of that work. That's something that's not presently available in the disclosure forms that the legislators have to file. So if all the legislators have to disclose all of the clients that they directly work on, that'll be a huge victory. The question remains as to, what exactly is a client and what level of work do you provide for that client? If you help to bring in that client to the firm, should you have to report it? We believe yes, but we're not sure if the ethics package that will get ultimately decided contains that.
Yeah, and look, there's two bottom lines here. One is the real way to get rid of all of this is to just say no moonlighting, right? Which is actually something I think you and I have discussed before. I've discussed with other advocates, and you might even favor that. It's just that it's so difficult to get legislators who make as a base salary $79,500 to agree to that sort of thing, isn't it?
It is. I mean, one of two things have to happen. Either you have to continue the current system, and you ideally would have citizen legislators still who could earn outside income. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's disclosed and it's within the framework of the ethics disclosure. Or the other thing is you can make this a permanent professional legislature, and I'm not sure we really want to do that for two reasons. you don't want to make it so permanent that they're here all the time. And two, you'd have to pay them a lot of money in order to attract the talent that you need in order to do the business of government.
Right. And we should also just say there are going to be people who do bad things. If you're a type of person who has a criminal intent, all the laws in the world are not going to stop you from bad action.
Right. And
There's
even
no way to legislate that.
And exactly. And as we discussed on your show a couple months ago, even with the ethics reform of 2007, the crime wave of public corruption has tripled over the last 6 years.
Right.
So even with better reform, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be less corruption.
Okay, your event today was basically to say don't forget redistricting reform. And it seems to be a little bit off the table. It's not part of what we're hearing for the ethics discussions. It's not part of this package. It was deemed by one big proponent, I believe Bill Samuels, who's a Democratic advocate, has been on this show, of course, 99% dead. I mean, do you believe that there's still room, 9 days left, for redistricting reform?
There's plenty of room. As you and I know, Liz, lots of things come out of nowhere and get settled before the end of a legislative session. And I think it's very much alive, even though it may not be publicly discussed. There are conversations going on. I know that the governor is extremely committed to this. The speaker is committed to trying to pass a bill soon that meets the objective of independent redistricting. As you know, he's introduced the governor's bill. There are 95 assembly members who have joined with the speaker in support of that bill. The governor has said that he would veto any lines drawn by the legislature, and he's carried a pretty big stick. And I think that the Senate has finally come to believe that he is serious about that threat. And I think they're really rethinking their position over there, because they do not want the lines to be vetoed and then thrown into the courts, and all chaos would break out, because the courts would then draw the lines.
What is it that indicates to you that the Senate Republicans are actually starting to rethink this? Because I haven't seen anything like that.
Well, I think that they have not really taken at face value the governor's threat to veto the lines, that this is something that could be negotiated away. And the governor has said it publicly, and apparently, from what I'm hearing from individual senators, have privately restated his commitment to veto the lines. And so they're finally paying attention in a way that they may not have a month or two ago to this idea that they better come up with some alternative to meet in order for the governor to avoid having to veto it.
There's been okay, let's also remind viewers that we're talking about redistricting that is not something that needs to be done this year. It has to be done in time for 2012. However, it's an enormous undertaking, and LAT4, as it's known, which is the legislative arm, the traditional way that redistricting has been done in the past, is actually moving forward, and it was funded in the budget. So one way could have been to starve it to death, from resources, but perhaps that wouldn't have been wise, because then New York would have been in trouble all around.
Well, maybe somewhat ideally preferable, it would not have been wise to do that, because whatever replacement independent commission comes forward can build on the good work that's being done by LAT4 and just make different decisions than those that are made directly by the legislature.
Yeah, there's been also a little bit of talk, and nothing actually serious, but speculation, that what might the Senate Republicans really, really want, that they would be willing to trade away for something that they really, really don't want. This is horse trading, of course, happens at the Capitol all the time, and I've discussed it on this show before, so viewers are familiar. The problem is they really don't want the legalization of gay marriage. The governor really wants that. They really want to keep the control of the Senate, and you could see where this is going.
Right.
If, in fact, someone floated a trade, redistricting for gay marriage, governor, back off redistricting, we will bring gay marriage to the floor, would that be appropriate in your mind?
It would not be appropriate, and I just can't. Listen, horse trading goes on all the time in order to achieve political objectives. I just can't imagine that, a political reform issue like redistricting would be traded away for an issue like marriage equality, where that really needs to be a vote by conscience. You're talking about, an important social civil rights issue. Gaining approval on the basis of protecting political power. Those two are so incongruous with each other that I can't imagine one being traded for the other, or that even the governor would entertain such a thing, since he has made it so clear that he wants independent redistricting as well as marriage equality.
Well, as we said again, the timing here on redistricting, it seems like there's some wiggle room on that. On gay marriage, the governor's made it clear that he actually wants it before the session ends. The session ends on June 20th. He also wants ethics reform. Are you willing at this point, you've already said you think this week will be an announcement on an ethics deal, are you willing to say, in your opinion, and you're founder of ESPA, the Empire State Pride Agenda, largest LGBT organization in New York, are you willing to say that you believe there will be gay marriage this year?
You know, I'm close to it. I'm not close enough to it, but I think that there would never. Everyone's waiting for the other side to blink in the Senate, and I don't think that either side is going to do anything unless there's a firm commitment that the Senate Dems are going to produce as many votes as they possibly can, even produce previous no votes. And if that were to happen and the Republicans were assured of that, I think you'll see 4 or 5 Republicans come forward. But they're both circling the wagons around each other and trying to figure out if, in fact, the commitment of the other side is true and can be counted upon. And if that happens, we may very well see marriage equality.
Interesting. Okay. I want to remind viewers to head to our interactive map. We've got an interactive map on our site of state of politics on our site, capitaltonight.com, for gay marriage. And I want to thank you very much, Dick Dadey from Citizens Union, for being here. It's great.
Thanks.